Hi guys, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. I wanted to hop on today. I have been watching a bunch of people's top decks of 2019, the top 5. I don't really know I don't think it's a VR, but I've been seeing a lot of people talk about just like the top decks and reflecting on the ones that really stood out to them throughout the year, or maybe were the most used, or for one reason or another would be considered like a top deck for them in the year. And at first I wasn't sure if I was going to do this just because I just did the Council of Seven not too long ago, but I feel like that's different. The Council of Seven I felt like was more of a reflection of me, like as a person, whereas the top 5 decks kind of would more so reflect like my circumstances or my experiences throughout 2019. So for me, like Council of Seven was more introspective, internal self, and the top 5 is more so like the external, environmental, circumstantial favorites. So I guess that's how I'm rationalizing it to make it sort of different. And there is some overlap. I know that 2 of these decks that I have are the same as the council, which makes sense. I mean, there is overlap there. But I wanted to just come on and share with you guys and talk a little bit about why these decks were so important for me this year, why they stuck out, and why they're a top deck for me. So without further ado, they're in no particular order. Sorry, I'm picking them up from down here. I had them right beside me. The first one is, and this is one that was also my Council of Seven, I'll knock those 2 out first, is the Spirit Keeper's Tarot, the Vitruvian edition. And I mentioned in, well, I received this deck this year, so that's the first thing. And it was one that, actually, up until I ordered it, I remember seeing the first edition, and then I didn't think it would be a deck for me. Every time I saw it, it like grew on me a little bit, and then the second edition came out, and it wasn't anything to do with the difference between the first and the second, just that like the idea of what this deck wasn't something I thought I wanted until I'd seen it enough times, and then like my exposure to it somehow like turned my mind a little bit, and then I went out on a limb and got it. And a lot of the decks this year are decks that like surprised me, were decks that like I didn't think I would like, and then I ended up loving. So I knew that I wanted to kind of really go all in where this deck was concerned, just because there's a lot to it. And the first couple months I just kind of like played around with it, and then I started I have like there's the book of maps, the medium white book, and the workbook course and the coloring book. So I did start the workbook, and I did that for about 12 or 13 weeks without fail, like not skipping any of the days, which was actually kind of difficult, but was really rewarding. But then I kind of fell off. I went away for like a long weekend to visit my sister, and then I got sick after, like pretty, like significantly sick. And so I took a break there, and then there was a few like more health issues, and it just like wasn't my top priority. And so I haven't really picked it up again, but I was really on it for like just over 3 months, like consistently, and I would love to finish the last, I believe it's like 9 or 10 weeks that I have left. So I need to pick that up and get back into that, but I do feel like those really, I haven't been showing you any of the images, I'm sorry. I do feel like that really helped me to sort of get to know this deck. And here, I'll just do it like this so you can see the full thing. But I do feel like that helped me to get to know the deck really well and understand the images, and it doesn't really feel so foreign and intimidating like it did in the beginning, after having read the majority of like the book of maps, the medium white book, and doing the exercises consistently, which consists of like readings and working with the cards and different activities that play into sort of the themes of this deck, being very like holistic and esoteric, but yet at the same time like spiritual and free flowing. There's a lot here, and I just feel like it is really heavy, and it isn't like a deck that I would just flip open cards. Honestly, when I was doing like the workbook course, I was only doing pretty much what the workbook was telling me to do, just because there was already a lot there, and so I wasn't really feeling like I needed to use it any more than that. But I've still been using it even though I've kind of fallen off the workbook. And it is more of that like long-term relationship with the deck that's not going to just like click overnight. It's just kind of grown from being rather confusing into something that's really wonderful. So zero regrets with this deck, and I really love it. So that's been a top deck for me. Just, oh, is that upside down? A top deck for me. Actually, I use this card a lot for like ritual work. There's like a prosperity ritual within the workbook course that you do every Thursday. And a lot of these cards, I love how she goes into like ritual use for some of them, but then you can kind of come up with your own. And for me, in the prosperity ritual, this the Eminence is really one that stood out. So I have a ritual based around her and her energy for prosperity. So I love how these cards actually, I would say, are like perfect for spell work and rituals and manifestation, and really getting in touch, especially with those associations. Like this was really awesome for things like that. Let's put that guy back. And I'm totally off the screen right now. I apologize. Just trying not to make a mess. Okay. And then our next overlap. So this is, out of the 5, 2 of them overlap. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm getting them out first. So if you want to skip over them, if you've watched my Council of 7, and that is the Tarot de Saint Croix by Lisa de Saint Croix. And I know that like I talked more so in depth about like how I perceive this deck in my Council of 7. But for me this year, like emotionally speaking, this was like really important, and it felt like it hit home, and that it kind of illustrated and personified my emotions in a way that like maybe I was unclear with my own emotions, and being able to express and realize them really like so consciously. And then readings with this would almost like I don't know, turn on a light bulb for me about certain feelings and how I was thinking and feeling and reacting when I wasn't so aware of it myself. So it was really good in like surfacing certain emotions that I was maybe suppressing, just like the imagery, the artwork, the colors, the expressions of the people. It's all extremely evocative and visceral. So for me, this was like a very personal deck, one that I would just turn to and usually pull like a card or two whenever I was just feeling confused or having a feeling I didn't fully understand. So this was really helpful. I wouldn't say it's like a comfort or hug, but a lot more just like a mirror, if that makes any sense. And it's been quite helpful in that way. Next, we have the Tarot of the She. This is one that I've had and worked with consistently for a while, and I kind of debated with the Council of 7 putting it in, and then I kind of regretted almost not putting it in, just because it has been such like a mainstay for me. I use this one for clients as well. I would say it's like one of the few. I am more traditional in terms of working. Sorry, low power. I don't know. No, the video's still going. Okay. This one is more traditional. I mean, like a non-traditional deck that I use for clients. So in one way, it's a top deck just because I did use it for clients, and there aren't that many decks that I like use for clients. I like to feel like I have like a really firm grasp of the deck, but also like, I don't know. I'm not sure what it is about certain decks that I'm like willing to work with clients with, and others I'm not. Sometimes that does change, but this year I use this one a lot for clients and a lot for myself. It's just extremely expressive. It feels like this like narrative that's super cohesive and natural. Not natural just as like an inclination of the self, but more so natural like as far as like a story that's just like almost like before words, like a natural oral type story, if that makes sense. The way that they work together, and the scenes and the scenic type images, I felt like resonated really well with others, and they seemed to really engage in them. And I like for my readings with clients to be very almost like discussion based. I like to hear what they have to say and think based on my own findings, and as I'm reading and giving them information, I like to hear them reciprocate if they're willing or if they want to. Not that that's like something that needs to happen, but when they do, I really like how that enhances the reading, and I feel like this got a lot of people to open up and to feel as though they could speak, whereas maybe with other cards and decks that wouldn't have been the case. So I'm thankful that this was one that facilitated that. So this was a top deck for me, with that being a primary reason or factor. And so then that's 3. We have 2 more. And we'll do... Okay, this is like more of an obvious one. And I think that this is like, depending on your system, I'm sure that like a basic one will be part of it. So yeah, just the Centennial Rider-Waite. This isn't like my original Rider-Waite deck. My first deck was like the plaid backs, but this one I find is like a lot, I don't know, the colors are nice. There's all that. I'm not somebody who's like such a stickler for, oh, the yellows and the this and the that. That doesn't bother me too much. I would say the backs actually are nice to have, just because the plaid backs seemed really corny, and I felt like, especially for clients, there is something about creating that feeling for them of it being this like very authentic experience, and these to me just seem very authentic and traditional. So for people that I just was gonna go for more, like actually I would say I use this one more than any, but so I guess it is the biggest one for like the clients. So that's a big reason why it's a top deck. And then of course just like continuing studies. I'm sure we all do that as tarot readers. We're like, whenever we're brushing up on anything, or find a nice new book that's based on like the system, like a given system we want to work with and study alongside the deck that is like an original, the original imagery. So I was using this for study, I was using this for clients, I used it a bit for myself, just out of like that old, like kind of like going back to my roots, like the nostalgia of having like the Rider-Waite as my only deck for like the first few years of my practice, and before I like picked up any other decks. So yeah, I would say that this one's pretty self-explanatory, but of course it's a top deck. It's almost a little boring, but yeah, it just felt like it needed to I mean, it was going to be a top deck. It probably will likely always be somewhat of a top deck, just because of what it is. And then our last but not least, and this one I was like, how have I not spoken about this guy yet? I saw so many people earlier in the year talk about this, which moved me or inspired me to purchase it, and it is the Art History Tarot Past Lives. Is that how it's actually called? Art History Tarot for Past Lives. Comes with this nice bag. You can get like the deck with the guidebook. The guidebook I would say is pretty essential, and then there's the workbook. So I have all of those. I haven't finished the workbook, but I would say that I'm like more than halfway through. I kind of just will occasionally come back to it whenever I'm feeling called to do so. But these are the backs. They're really pretty. Red Orchid Publishing, and then there's the Red Orchids. So I think this is one that maybe a bunch of people have seen this year. Just like working with past lives, and I've kind of been surprised that it wasn't ever something that I imagined myself doing, but I tried, and I was like kind of getting into it this year, and I was surprised. Ooh, they're not all the right way. I was surprised by like the findings, and a lot of reoccurring cards that and elements and themes. and how that kind of made me feel, and I was almost like shocked by some reoccurrences that were so common throughout so many different readings in very similar spread positions and on certain topics of like myself and conflicts or strengths and paths and connections. So that was really powerful. I would say this isn't like a traditional tarot deck, and for a second I was like, oh, would I count this as more of an oracle? But I wouldn't. There's every single card has like the tarot association, and along with like the key word or thing that goes along with it. And if like the keyword or place or time doesn't really work, then you kind of draw it back down to that meaning. So at its core, it is tarot, but with some modifications to the system for the purposes of reading with past lives. And of course, the artwork is super evocative, and you can read into that where you're looking at past lives and trying to snuff out different definitions or like traits and keywords. So I would say that this is one that made me work on my intuitive abilities in a way that had previously been untapped. So I'm very thankful for that. And it's kind of like the unsung hero of the year, because I don't know, it just was around and I would occasionally work with it, but it wasn't, I would say it was a very consistent deck for me that I continued to come back to and felt a longing to return to. So with that being said, I guess that's how that guy comes into the fray. So these are my top decks or at least the decks that I feel like are my top decks for 2019. I'm thinking of, I saw, who is it? Oh man, I know her name. Well, I know it's Boho Tarot. Dawn Michelle, I think, talked about the decks that she wants to work with, that she has in her collection come 2020, and I thought that that would be interesting, sort of setting or like recording like a documented version of like what I hope to work with in 2020, and then seeing how that kind of manifests, because I do have specific lists, or a specific, I guess, mental ongoing list of decks that I'd like to work with in 2020. I've been reading like the Book of Thoth and working with Thoth decks, or like mostly just the traditional Thoth, the bigger version, the green box. So I'm sure that that will be one. I did work with Marseille a bit. None of them made it into this top deck, I guess just because it was a new system for me, and I wouldn't say it was something where I was consistently working and jiving with them. It was more so like sporadic study and book reading. So who knows, maybe next year there will be like a Thoth or a Marseille amongst the ranks of the top decks. But now I'm rambling. But if that video comes out, we shall see. So I hope you guys are all having a nice day. If you have top 5 videos, I'm sure I'll stumble upon them, but if not, and you aren't somebody who really likes to make videos or won't be making a video like this, please let me know in the comments what your top decks or decks that you were really loving this year and why, because I'm curious to know. Yeah, until next time. Bye, guys.